All right, folks. Welcome to I'll wait for a few people to get on, I suppose. This is something that I've never done before. We got a whole list of people coming on tonight. We got a guest tonight. And, we're going to see if we can find out a few different answers off a couple different stories. It all started with a heartbeat episode. That's Sheldon Yakachuk. His interviews he's been doing on Substack. And he had Drew Weatherhead from the Social Disorder on, and they interviewed a man named Dave Drover. And so he's a former geologist, professional geologist, and that spurred on a whole bunch of conversations, which led us here tonight. You know, I'm sitting there going, the Oilers won last night. Twos won't want to hear that. But that's the, we're not impeding on the Edmonton Oilers. Not that matters in matters like this. But if you're tired of watching whatever NHL playoff is on and you want to, get to some different things tonight, we hope you'll join us. I'm going to introduce a whole bunch of people. We'll get right to it. Starting on, we'll bring in Sheldon Yakachuk. Thanks for joining tonight, Sheldon. Sheldon, of course, is Yakstack Substack. You'll find him on Twitter and Heartbeat Interviews. How's it going tonight, sir?
Going really good. And it's great that we could all get together so quick. I mean, we got a really good story, really good conversation that started, and just really want to see where more of this information can kind of fit in. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's been fun watching you as you do your heartbeat, because you've been like pumping them out, and there's been names coming across there. I'm like, who is this? Now I got to go listen, and that's been fun to watch. So appreciate you inviting me into this. I'm going to try and do what I do and allow everybody else to speak, and I'll try and bring some people in. So next up on the list. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say your platform, man. You're hosting, so yeah. No, we want to see how this goes, and definitely utilize your experience in making this happen.
Well, next up, we got no stranger to the podcast. We've got 222 minutes. Thanks for hopping on, Twos. Of course, he's from the Tuesday Mashup. 222 minutes.
It's just called the Mashup now.
It's true.
I put the memo out to all our employees that it's now just the Mashup. Okay.
I didn't even get to the best part, Twos. It's a self-proclaimed award-winning podcast, right? We're award-winning podcast. So,
not self-proclaimed. I actually won an award.
Fair.
No one can ever take that from me.
Next up, we got a constitutional lawyer, host of the Gray Matter podcast, Leighton Gray. Thanks for joining us tonight. He's sporting not the ugliest Edmonton Oilers jersey. I'm a giant Oilers fan, but it is the cartoon one with the oil drop. The new version? What do we call that now? The third version of the third?
Yeah, this is one of their third jerseys, I think. But it's I'm sporting number 29. Who's my favorite Oiler, Leon Draisaitl. So yeah, great to be on tonight. Looking forward to listening to everybody talk and hopefully adding a few comments myself that are useful and meaningful and maybe even entertaining to people. So thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it.
Appreciate you coming on, Leighton. Next up, we got Wayne Peters. I think you've been on the stage with me, Wayne, in Edmonton before, and I think people on my side know how highly I think of your work. You were a trailblazer for this guy when I was trying to find different people to interview. You were probably, I was joking today, I think like 6 months ahead of me. I don't know if that's factual or not, but that's what I think. How's Wayne doing tonight?
I'm in shock and awe of all of these award-winning folks here. Such high praise. Thank you. I'm not worthy. I appreciate any opportunity, though, to take part in a force multiplier of like minds and great conversation and discussion. So thanks for the invite. I have no idea what we're in for, but I'm sure it's going to be magnificent. And everybody, wherever you're watching from, make sure you share this out right out of the hop.
And I'll say this, Wayne, just real quick, if I may. If you're interested in getting some kind of an award, talk to Sean and I. We can come up with something for you.
Yeah, we might just start our own awards. That's not a bad idea, too.
Actually, yeah, that would be pretty good.
I mean, that's what the Taxpayers Federation did.
Okay,
right?
we can talk about that.
Yeah. Fair.
On the
Fair.
Mac.
This is supposed to be welcome to the. You get us two knuckleheads on these sides. Either way, Wayne, you're the original time I ever did something like this, where it was a force multiplier, if you would, where you had tons of different hosts in the same room. Was you inviting me onto your side? So I appreciate that. Happy to have you here. Let's get to David Drover. David's hopping in. He's a former professional geologist, 20 plus years in the oil and gas industry. He's got a story. Once again, I go back to Sheldon and then Drew, who might hop in later. Drew Weatherhead from the Social Disorder interviewed him, passed along to me. We got talking about it, and we thought we'd just have him back on, tell his story to everybody here on the live stream, and then with these brilliant minds sitting in the room, I'm sure we can ask some questions and spur on some conversation. So, David, thanks for joining us tonight. And David, you are muted. Welcome to live streaming. There you are.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I'm going to be a bit of a unique guest for you because, listen to the various podcasts. Even today, I heard this guest come on, and the first thing they said was, "I'm glad to be here," and I thought the way I'm going to intro myself is I'm actually not glad to be here. I'm actually not looking forward to this conversation. It's a very difficult conversation for me to have. I suspect there'll be, emotional moments. It's a 10-year long story. I've chosen to be quiet for a very long time, 10 years. And it was to give the backstory, because this is just happening over this last week. As I understand it, Sheldon saw a tweet that I had made. Someone had sent him the tweet that I had made, tagged him in it, and Sheldon got a hold of me right away and wanted to know if I wanted to do a podcast. And I was, in fact, 3 others did as well, and I declined. But there was something that Sheldon had said that made me want to give this a go, and I just thought it was my time. I don't want the limelight. I don't want notoriety. I'm not doing it for that. As a professional geologist as an exploration geologist in oil and gas, working in Calgary for 20 plus years, I've got a bachelor's degree, I got a master's in science, so I'm highly educated. But when you get that professional designation, what that actually means is you have the obligation to protect the public interest. So which is what I did starting about 10 years ago. In fact, I ended up working for the RCMP to do just that, thinking it was the right thing to do and thinking it was my professional obligation to do. But to say the least, the last 10 years hasn't gone so well.
Well, could we start here, David? I've listened to Sheldon's Heartbeat episode, and if you haven't, please go search that out. It is on Substack. It is on Social Disorder, and I think it's a nice beginning point. But there's going to be a lot of people who haven't heard any of your story. So why don't we just start wherever you want to start? You can start before you're getting into the limelight, the hot water, whatever you want to call it, and just lead us through the journey into this, so we can get a better feel for who David is. The audience can get a feel for who you are. And we can start to understand the quagmire you stepped into, fell into, pushed into. Would just like to kind of get a feel for the story. You can go as slow or as fast as you want. You're looking at a group of guys who enjoy hearing a story. I'm sure the audience is along for the ride tonight as well. So why don't you just start? Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and walk us through it.
Sure, and I will caveat everything that I'm going to say is that I have actually a jail sentence hanging over my head, as the judge said, like the sword of Damocles, with respect to 2 injunctions which have gagged me for almost 10 years from speaking about this stuff. So to that point, I will not be naming names or defaming anybody or going in that. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to be very, very careful tonight. This is different from the podcast that I did with Drew and Sheldon, in that it was pre-recorded, so we had the opportunity to edit. And so out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to be very careful what comes out of my mouth. And if I pause or take a rest for a second, I'll come back. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to say something. So without further ado, in 2013, boy, I'd come to Calgary in 1991. After graduating my bachelor's in geology, I worked with all the majors and as a summer student in the early 90s. It was fun as hell. Worked with Mobil, Amoco. At that time, there was a bunch of small companies. Anyway, the short of it is I had a bunch of fun in the early 90s working for small companies, coming back and forth between my hometown and Newfoundland, where I was doing my degrees, my first degree, my bachelor's degree, and coming as a summer student in the early 90s, exploring for oil and gas for these multinational major companies. I finally moved to Calgary in 1994, and I mean, I had nothing, I had zero, and so I was told at that time that in order to make it in the business, you had to do a PhD, and I thought, well, geez, I barely got my bachelor's, so I went to the University of Calgary and I did a master's in science in structural geology, and I spent a few years doing that. I was working back and forth because I didn't have any money. I had to work my way through school, and then 2000 happened. I basically started full-time working finally because it was very difficult to get a full-time job prior to 2000. I started work with Talisman Energy. Most of you know who that company is if you're in Calgary, and at that time it was kind of off to the races. I mean, if you could almost spell geologist, you got work in Calgary. So it went from, you couldn't get in with a PhD unless you had a PhD, to now say 2000, where if you could spell geologist, you were getting work. And it was the beginning of the price escalation of oil to 2006, where it was $150 a barrel, and it was very exciting times. It was fun times. I had gone from a hurting student to a multimillionaire. We had moved from a very small home that we had bought that we barely could afford to living out in Springbank in a 7,000 square foot home on a few acres. And, I got to hang with the sort of in crowd. During that time, I worked with very successful companies in Calgary. Peyto Energy Trust is one, working for Don Gray. Petromineralis is another, working for John Wright and Corey Rattan. So I had a lot of friends, I knew a lot of engineers, I knew a lot of professional engineers, professional geologists. We had a home in the United States in California, which in Indio, California, so it was nice and hot, so it was a good reprieve from the winter time. We used to go down on weekends, and I basically in March 2011, I had decided that I was gonna semi-retire. I was 40 something, 42, 43. I had lots of money, more money than I probably knew what to do with. My kids were taken care of. We were again living the dream. I decided that I would, as sort of a hobby, start my own oil and gas company. Sort of skipping to October 2013, and that's when our world came apart. So by that time, I had started an oil and gas company. I had raised a couple of $1 million from friends and family when nobody in the industry was raising funds. And I had drilled a well on an Indian reserve in Saskatchewan. I'm not going to get into these details. These matters are before the courts as well. I do not have an injunction to speak about them, but these things can be looked up. I mean, Leighton could have this stuff, you could probably Google this live and see that this stuff is real. So I'm not saying anything in fact, I won't be saying anything tonight that actually you couldn't confirm in the courts in BC and in Alberta. So the start of it was in October 2013. these people, we'll call them they took over my oil and gas company. It was just a couple person company. I had 44 shareholders. Most of them were my friends and family. So it was these people, they that took over my oil and gas company from me. Within a few months, they had defrauded it. And within a few months after that, they had pinned the demise of their fraud on me in lawsuits, in professional complaints, in criminal complaints. And my wife and I were, we were devastated. So again, that started in October 2013. By December 2013, we decided we needed to get out of Dodge. And so we, almost in the middle of the night, leaving, many of our very, very good dear friends that we had in Calgary, and without any explanation, because there was no explaining this to anybody. At this point in time, most of my friends and family, including my parents and others who were shareholders, father-in-law and such, they were understanding that I was a fraud. And so we had as I said, we had a home in the States. So we sold our home quickly. We lost probably $1 million on that sale alone. It was just so rushed. We just knew we had to get out, and we moved to our home in the States, and we stayed for less than 6 months. We stayed 6 months less a day to avoid that situation in the United States. And we thought things would get better, but they really got worse. And the professional complaints were in. I was being investigated by my professional associations. The lawsuits were in, so pinning a fraud on me. And so it was a very difficult time. I was a mess. And fast forward to August the 14th, August, I can remember that date. It was August the 16th, 2014, and I'm monitoring my emails. And at this point in time, I had 2 or 3 lawyers working for me to manage this situation. So I was sort of out of it. You just listen to your advice of your lawyers at that time. And so I was staying quiet. And I get this email from one of the plaintiffs, and it was threatening. I mean, it was we are going to destroy your life. We're going to remove you. At that time, I had formed a couple of TSX listed companies. One was a mining company called Aston Bay, of which I discovered the Storm Copper property in 1996 while I was working with Cominco. But anyways, long story short, I'd co-founded that company in 2013. I'd started another CPC with the TSX with a bunch of lawyers and stuff in Calgary. I had started another private. Anyways, I was kind of at the top of the game. Prior to 2013, I was at the top of my game. I was just having so much fun, and then to have it all come down, like it did, to lead to this single letter that was threatening that everything would be taken away from me. And not only that, they would go after my family, and they named my wife to go after her for the money, which I apparently defrauded my shareholders of this oil and gas company. So at that point, I mean, I was at a loss. I was devastated. I was a mess. My lawyers were advising me that I was insane and that I needed to go to rehab. I just wasn't right. And so it was, let's see, we'll go from.
I hate to hop in, David.
Go for it. Yep.
But I want to make sure I understand. And at any point, boys on the side, if you want to hop in, by all means. I've muted this all so we don't interrupt. But my curiosity is taken over. In 2013, we're labeling them as they, and I think in today's world we talk a lot about they. And they take over your oil company. I'm just wondering, was it like a welcomed, hey, come on in, these guys are friends, and then they turn into foe immediately? Was it like we're going bankrupt, you needed some help, so you saw it? Like, how is it that they get access to something you've built? Just to start there.
Huh. Yeah, that one could be a podcast on itself. But as I understand it, as it was happening to me, there was well, let's call it a shareholder revolt. So these people were known to me. They were shareholders of the company, former family friends, and they took over the company through the bylaws, using all the legal rules of the bylaws that were put in place. And it was they forced me out by the shareholder bylaws, and it was all legit, but it was not, it was never explained to me why they did it. There was nothing behind it saying you have defrauded the company and we're going to kick you out. It was like, we're kicking you out, we're not telling you why, we're going to take this thing over. And within a few months it was defrauded, and then within a few months after that they pinned it on me. So this, and again, this is all outlined in lawsuit and documents, affidavits and stuff that have been before the court since March 2014, when they served me with it. So it's not something, it's something, if anyone wanted to look more into it, they could read what that story was about. But it to your point, I could have just said that it wasn't a friendly takeover, and we didn't understand why they were doing it. But you'll understand why if I go to this point in time. And this was in September 2014. And I'm going to skip how this phone call happened, but I was approached by the RCMP, let's say. And this RCMP was known to me for reasons which I can't get into. And he so the people who that had taken over my company, he asked me would I help the RCMP in an investigation into they. And so at that point, I'm going, these guys are rich. I'm moderately rich, but not that rich. And I knew that I was just, they were going to win, I was going to lose. It's just simple math. And so I approached it in such a way, like, can you protect me? Like, can you protect my identity? And so we talked about that. And the kicker was for me was that I just had a guy had a quad accident right in front of me, which is crazy. So this is like live. I think the person's all right. I don't think they're dead. They're getting back up slowly. Yeah. Okay, so back on track. Too bad we can't cut that out. Boy, oh, that was just something that just flipped over about 4 or 5 times. I think someone's coming over to help, so I think we're good.
If you need to leave to go help, you can go leave to go help. We're not going to hold you to it.
We can filibuster for a bit if you.
Yeah. No, that was weird. So,
do you need to go?
Okay. Yeah. No, I think the kid's okay. There's a person coming out there, but the bike is flipped over. There's a car stop now. Yeah, we're good. So the point of where I'm at now is the phone conversation with the RCMP member, and what really came to me again, what I go back to being a professional. You have the obligation to protect the public interest, and that even despite the fact that I knew that I was not going to win this one with these guys, I thought I have to trust the RCMP. I mean, this is the RCMP, and I have the obligation to help to protect the public interest. So I did, and I ended up working for the RCMP for a period of about 6 months. Obviously, I can't get into the details. I will say over that 6 months, and what they wanted me to work on was not the oil and gas fraud per se. It was another company of which I was a shareholder, with these same people. There was shared shareholders between these two companies. They became shareholders of my oil and gas company, and I became shareholders of their company. So it was this company that the RCMP wanted help with, and it was geological in nature, so it was right up my forte. So as I was working with the RCMP on this investigation in my basement full time, I get a phone call from an investigator at the Alberta Securities Commission, and I can talk about this, at least to the extent that I can't talk about what was said in the investigation. But I get a call. His name was Paul Kavanagh, also a professional geologist, the same professional association I was. We were, I would say, cohorts. So, of course, when you're talking to another professional geologist, you can talk turkey. And so we were able to do that. He asked me, would I come in to testify and produce documents in an investigation into the very same people and company that I was working with the RCMP on a completely confidential basis. And you can imagine how stunned I was, to say the least. And so my inquiry back to him was, well, you have no whistleblower protection, so that's not going to happen. And his back to me was to serve me a subpoena under the threat of jail, if you read the fine print, if you don't show up, to not only produce documents in this investigation, but to come in and testify in the Alberta Securities Commission offices. And I did that on October the 8th, 2014. So as I was on the way to Calgary to do that, in the days leading up to that, of course, I had a conversation with the RCMP, and I said, we got a problem. I've been subpoenaed to go to Calgary and testify in the same investigation that you guys are doing. What should I do? And the response that I got from the now two members that I'm speaking with, so there was three of us on this conversation, was, do not tell the Alberta Securities Commission that you have any relationship with us. Now, please appreciate that that was not going to happen. The Alberta Securities Commission, when you testify, you're testifying under oath. And if they had asked me, I probably said I wasn't going to volunteer it, but I definitely said to them that if they ask me, I'm going to tell them. It's got to be that way. So that happened. And I can only say that those two decisions were the worst two decisions that I've made in my entire life, because that's what I believe that has caused my family to have lost everything over the last 10 years. And both the ASC and the RCMP have let me and my family down. The ASC, again, so let's fast forward to June of 2015. Now, I did get into these dates when I did the first podcast. I don't plan to get to the specifics, but I will say that in June 2015, I received notice that the investigation by the Alberta Securities Commission from this lead investigator at the Alberta Securities Commission, Paul Kavanagh, that this investigation was concluded and the ASC was not going to take any action. So please appreciate that from October 2014 to June of 2015, this investigation's open. I'm still under subpoena, because when the subpoena is served, the subpoena, it compels you to provide any documents that you received. So I had constant communication with the Alberta Securities Commission, providing documents as I received them, because at the time I was starting to do my own investigations. Well, plus I had also been working for the RCMP, so I was privy to that work as well. Over those months, or almost a year, I was writing emails, one that I would send to the RCMP, one that I would send to the Alberta Securities Commission, just changing the names. So they were all privy to the same information. And what I can say is, with some confidence, is that I strongly believe that investigation was quashed. And this is where things get a little touchy, because as you all know, I think it was on or about May 24th, 2015, Rachel Notley had won the election in a massive surprise. And prior to that, Jim Prentice was the premier. Well, the investigation at the Alberta Securities Commission was into, let's say, a business associate, someone who Jim Prentice had known. And I'm privy to information to know that during his premiership, that there was documents that I was privy to, and the public were actually privy, the courts were privy to, that attest to the potential quashing of that investigation in shortly before the May 2015 election. Post that, remember I said it was June 2015 when I received official notice. So I'm none the wiser of anything going on at the AC with respecting, this is all years later that I'm able to put this all together. But in June of 2015, of course, I'm getting officially noticed by the Alberta Securities Commission that this investigation's over, and it's in my mind, it's effectively being quashed because I'm a victim of it, and I had invested enough money that this was a big loss for me. So I was not only what I would call an expert witness, because I was a professional geologist at the time. I was a board of director of a TSX listed company that I had co-founded, and I had provided testimony to the Alberta Securities Commission on this company, and yet, I'm finding out that the ASC is taking no action. So to me, that didn't make any sense. But what I can also say is that this had broader implications, because this was linked to the then Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau. And so please appreciate that I'm not a political person, but the writing was on the wall to me that there was going to be a fall election. And to my way of thinking at that time was like, I wonder if they're going to try to clean this up before the October 2015 election. And I believe strongly that that's what they did. Not only did the ASC clean things up, but the RCMP to my knowledge, stopped the investigation sometime. I quit with the RCMP in about February 2015, because what I was learning at the time, I didn't sign up for, just to say that mildly. And I felt that I was putting my family in danger if I continued with that investigation.
David, can I pause you for a second?
Yeah,
I'm trying to keep track of the story you're laying down, and I apologize if I'm dense, because that's probably me, and I will take the blame for this. I'm going to try and lay this back out to you, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting the timeline and the thought process correct. 2013, they take over your company that is listed on the stock exchange, correct?
No, so that was a private oil and gas company. It was sort of my hobby company.
Okay, so you
Small
had a hobby
yeah.
company that is off to the
Yes.
side, 40 some shareholders, which is family and friends, two of which legally take you out. And then after they've taken you out, are obviously disgruntled, and they go about their business and blame it on you as fraud. They seed that story, which puts you in a bad light. You then go to the States for a period of time to escape, I assume, some angry human beings
Yep.
because of what the story's been shaped on you. Somewhere in 2014, I think you said September, you're approached by the RCMP because although that's happened, you are a shareholder of a large oil and gas company, or at least one that's on the stock exchange, and they are investigating fraud. Am I right on that so far?
Correct. And
You
and
work.
a fraud of geologic nature.
What
So
is
I
what is a
invested.
fraud? Sorry, and I'm once again I'm the dense one. What is
Yeah.
fraud of geological nature?
Well, it could only be an oil and gas company or a mining company or something thereof. So I just don't want to say, because I just don't. I just think
Well,
it's
and once
just one of
again,
those things. I just.
If
But
I
it's a
could,
geologic. Yeah.
if I might, if you were to assign a ballpark dollar value to this geological fraud,
Yeah. Good point.
what
Yep.
would that look like?
$100 million plus. Yeah. And the so the ASC, and there's a lot of people who know this story at the ASC. There's probably a lot of shocked people. And the ASC is known for scandals, by the way, of quashing investigations into high-profile Albertans. The 2005 scandal is one. I'm not going to get into it. You can Google it. It's pretty much been cleaned from the internet. But the key person that was involved then in 2005, Dave Linder, was the executive director of the ASC when the investigation into this company was called, which, by the way, I did not start. So this is an important point to make. I'm not getting a phone call from the ASC to come in and testify because I've said anything or filed a complaint. I did not start that. My intention was to stay as far away from that company as I possibly can. It was understood to us as the years progressed. My wife and I would say, "Oh boy, they took our company because they're retaliating against me because of what I'd been finding out about what they were doing at the other company." And that obviously, became quite clear once I got involved with the RCMP and the ASC. And in fact, the second
David,
professional,
once again, sorry, I'm the dense one. I apologize again, but
oh no, it's a complicated story.
well, it is. And when you get talking about it, I'm like, okay, so you were investigating them before they came into your company and took it over, then? And how
No,
were you
no,
ruffling tail feathers by that time?
Yeah, so I'll just lay that out again. So October 2013, they take the company over by surprise. We get out of Dodge by December 2013. The lawsuits and everything, the professional complaints fly in March, April of 2014, saying I'm a fraud and a whole bunch of other things. In fact, they filed the lawsuit as a professional complaint, which has started the whole professional complaint thing to begin with. So, and then we get to August 2014 when I got the threatening letter from they, which again told me that I was going to lose everything. I was going to lose my companies, my board of directorships. I was going to lose all my money, and that they were finally going to come back and take the money from my wife and my kids effectively. So they're basically telling me that they're going to destroy my life. And then so it was the days ensuing after that where I was basically at a weak moment and the RCMP call. So there's a bit more to that story, but the short of it, that's basically what happened. Was I get a threatening letter. Now I'm really pissed off. And the RCMP phone, "Hey, would you like to investigate these guys for, for this other thing, this thing that they're doing?" I'm like, "Well, if you can protect me, sure." And I probably have some professional obligation to work, but these guys are very wealthy, and they've already taken my company, and they're basically now holding it hostage. So that's the other part of it too. You can look at this and say they were basically holding this hostage so I would not talk about You see what I mean? Like they're basically pinning on me what they were doing, and they were doing that to keep me, under their thumb, so I wouldn't speak. And of course I didn't, and I was frightened to speak. I never told any friends and family. In fact, I didn't tell my wife that I worked for the RCMP for many years. So, and it wasn't confirmed until 2020. So does that clear up some? Is there something else there that I've missed?
Well,
Some other fill in the blanks
I'm
there?
curious. I'm curious. We got Leighton, we got Wayne, we got Sheldon. Is anybody interested in weighing in? And tossing their thoughts in, because you've been sitting there on the sidelines too as well, listening.
So a good portion of what David's gone through is a lot of the history that we kind of drilled out in the original podcast. So I'm kind of up to speed on it. Glad that he was able to fill in some additional details on that. Be interested in listening to what Leighton has to say about what he's hearing here. Does this seem like common stuff that we're seeing inside of our justice systems or with companies?
No, this is highly unusual. But unfortunately, it's an example of what I've been talking about and I've been writing about. And this is the politicization of the justice system. When I say justice system, I don't just mean the criminal justice system. I mean, the courts. And there's a larger explanation for it. But one thing I'm curious about, Dave, is this concept of fraud. People might not realize this, but fraud is one of the most difficult legal concepts to prove. And there's two species of fraud. One is criminal. Of course, there's a criminal code offense of fraud. And there's also a civil concept of fraud where you can sue somebody, for money, for damages because they've defrauded you. But in either case, it's very difficult because you must prove that the person who perpetrated the fraud intentionally did something that was dishonest in order to gain something to which they're not entitled. And so that mental element of proving fraud is very, very difficult. So I'm curious to know, were you actually charged with criminal fraud or civil or civil fraud was alleged in the case, but was that ever litigated? Were they ever able to prove that you either committed civil fraud or that you committed criminal fraud?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it would like so I'll answer it this way. The lawsuit, which again, civil, it's very important that I should have perhaps pointed that out, or Leighton, you can help me on this one. But basically, there's in the federal courts, there's the civil side and there's the criminal side.
Right.
So this was in the civil courts. Everything that I'm going to talk about was in the civil courts.
Okay.
And in Alberta, it was the Court of Queen's Bench at the time, Court of King's Bench now, and it's the BC Supreme. And the criminal complaints that were filed against me with the RCMP, which came a little bit later. Like, I wasn't working with the RCMP at the time that the complaints were, but it went to the same office of the RCMP who had linked me into the people that I was working with. So I wasn't really concerned. I mean, it was obviously an intimidation tactic, but I mean, they laid it out like, I had to FOIP this stuff too, we can have a whole other podcast, how to use FOIP to investigate.
Right.
Again, I used to be an investigator. I was an investigator for 10 years, and so I FOIP'd under ATIP, access to information. The Cal, and some of these things I would just do on a whim. I would just be like, hey, I wonder if they filed a criminal complaint there, and sure enough, I would find that they did, and it was quite, it was blatant. It was like it went direct to the police, who I had many communications, knew the story very, very well, and knew that I wasn't a fraud. In fact, I was actually working for the RCMP at the time when they say the fraud happened. And it just basically says, David Drover accused of $2 million fraud against his friends and family. It was just like, there was no mistake that was a fraud allegation, and it was against me and nobody else, and it was actually made 2 years after I left the company. So I was never charged.
So you never actually had to answer a criminal complaint of fraud in the courts.
Yes, and that was it. It did go to courts, and this is where it gets into the lawfare thing, and they take you off into things like, and Leighton, you know, this is if you don't have merit, you hit the tactics. So
Yes.
although the allegations in I mean, if you were to read the allegations in the lawsuit, Leighton, you'd be like, damn, that Trover guy is a bad dude. You know,
Right.
it's well written.
But they
I mean,
are only allegations until they're proven.
Exactly. And then
Were they ever
able
to prove fraud
No,
against
no,
you either in civil or criminal court?
No,
No.
that's not even
I'm not surprised to hear that. Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. And what I said about fraud earlier, that's part of the reason why that allegation was chosen. Another example that is often used are complaints of a sexual nature. And the reason why, when people say things like, when they make allegations like fraud or sexual assault, for example, these are considered crimes of a moral turpitude or of a moral nature. So that just saying them, just the publication of them is very damning to the person. Using the comparison of what's happening with Donald Trump in New York, where he's alleged to have done something improper with a woman who was a prostitute, when in fact all he did is he made a circuitous donation to his own campaign. But the mere allegation that he did something that most people would consider morally reprehensible, that's enough to apply the kind of pressure to him. Of course, if he wasn't Donald Trump. But in your situation, it's the same thing. The allegation, it's like the Me Too situation. It almost doesn't require the standard of proof. It almost robs you of the ability to defend yourself, because people, as soon as people say, oh, this guy's a fraud artist, he's a con man, most people who read that in the public are going to draw these conclusions about you, and they'll disregard the fact, unfortunately, that those things are unproven. And this is the sort of lawfare impact that you've been suffering under, as I understand it. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's exactly, and it's well put. And you know, I've got nothing more to say to that except you're bang on. And again, the court system, I thought, was, you know, I was proven guilty basically of fraud of my oil and gas company, and there was just no coming back. I think I said, you know, the same thing I said in the podcast with Sheldon and Drew. I said it's similar to the school teacher who has an allegation of sexual nature. It's almost like, you know, I call it the game of court, and it's almost like the first person that says the allegation first wins, and if you say something egregious enough, you just can't come back from it. And that was the situation I was in. And again, I had lawyers representing me at the time, and so they wrote great responses, but it just died on the vine. There's so much more to the story in the courts which were in Alberta at the time, and I was going to court kind of frequently during this time, post working for the RCMP, mind you. I actually thought that the RCMP would at some point step in, and I never were told the courts that for many years, and we can come to that later in the discussion, but I kept my part of the bargain, and it was them who, I'm only talking about this because it was the RCMP, a whole other story, through the Cullen Commission in BC, who in a ruling 35, which you can read on the Cullen Commission, breached that confidentiality, and in that ruling said that I worked for the RCMP. So anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself, but because there's still lots more story to go. But to come back to what you just said, yeah, it's like I was guilty before I could even get a chance to argue.
That's really the point. Yeah, it robs you of your procedural protections. The way our system is supposed to work is that there are supposed to be procedural protections there. This is why we require evidence to prove allegations. But unfortunately,
it was so egregious.
Sure.
It's just so egregious and shocking. Like
Yeah.
how does that even happen? I mean, I have a perfect record, 20 years success, the perfect family,
Yeah.
everything's going good, and then all of a sudden you're a fraud, like, and there's just no coming back from it.
Yeah. It's really it robbed you of your ability to defend yourself, to answer the allegations, because of course, when you're called a fraud artist, you're called a liar, and therefore everything else you say is a lie, right? And this is the essence of the problem. What you're describing, really honestly, it hurts my heart as a lawyer who has been in practice for over 30 years now. But just for the edification of people listening, I'll just give you a short explanation for what I think is happening. What we're experiencing right now is a politicization of our legal system, of our justice system. And it's not just the judges, it's also in the legal profession, but it's also in government. But the source of the problem, very simply, is actually, in my opinion, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and also the judicial selection process. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I talk about this in a piece that I published on my show that's called Juristic Park. So people are interested, they can go and watch that or listen to that. But essentially, Pierre Trudeau had an idea back in 1982 that he was going to introduce this charter not to protect the rights of Canadians, but actually to limit them. And he wanted to make Canadian society more secular. He wanted to move us away from being a religious country. We were at that time more religious than the United States, but also he was frustrated because he wanted to have the national government. He wanted to have the federal government in our country operate as a national government, much the way we're seeing Justin Trudeau do now. And the only way he could achieve that is to silently transfer lawmaking power from the legislatures, who reflect the democratic will of the people because we elect them, and they're answerable to us, from them to judges. And through the charter over the past 40 or so years, we've seen a massive transference of power, so that the most powerful lawmaking body in this country are actually judges. And most of the law, most of the law that we have right now, many of the laws that we take for granted, are actually being imposed upon us by an unelected elite, which are these judges. And of course, the other problem is that every Superior Court judge, every judge of the Court of King's Bench in Alberta and in every other province, and also our courts of appeal, they have to go through the Prime Minister's office. Those are political appointments. So every judge who sits in Alberta is essentially appointed by Justin Trudeau. And if people don't understand why that's a problem in Canada, then I'm sorry, you've been living under a rock. Because we got a guy running this country. What was his most recent thing? He says, if the premiers don't listen to me, I'm going to go around them. Well, and I'm saying, I'm bringing this back to you on the boots on the ground level. This is how it impacts people like you. It erodes these procedural protections. It erodes the rule of law. And unfortunately, these poor judges, a lot of them are under political pressure, in my opinion, because they owe their appointments to the fact, and this was reported in the National Post last summer, that over 80% of the judicial appointments in Canada since Justin Trudeau came to power, and it wasn't much different before that, but since 2015, over 80% were not only the people selected were not only members of the Liberal Party, but they were Liberal Party donors. And the most stark example, they tracked one of them who for many years had donated to the Conservative Party of Canada. And then they switched, and he had all the time he was applying to be a judge. He switched and started donating to the Liberal Party, and Bob's your uncle, he's a judge. So unfortunately, we're witnessing a deep politicization of the judiciary in this country. And of course, we have this blob, this administrative state. Mr. Trump calls it the swamp. And unfortunately, it acts itself out in cases like yours, Mr. Drover, where we have these gross injustices that occur. And it's because we don't have this fair, impartial judicial system anymore. It's been eroded. And if we're not careful, if we don't make important changes, we're going to lose it entirely. Anyway, I've been talking a long time. I want to hand it back to Sean. Let somebody else talk.
Well, and just before we get back to David and maybe tagging on to your story, David, and appreciate trying to get a few different people on the side panel involved. Wayne, I was just curious. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But
I'm chomping at the bit here.
Would you like to ask a question or just some thoughts here as we go along?
I need to add a little bit of context and maybe a little bit of converging lenses to approach this for you. And David, Mr. Drover, I feel for you. You are kind of in the crosshairs of multiple different levels of corruption converging over where the war zone that you're in. And I say this because I spent 15 years in high-level oil field fire and rescue and emergency services and emergency management and investigation and all of those kinds of things, and ultimately got ran out of the business myself for doing what was right in the public interest and exposing fraud amongst all different manners of oil company mismanagement. We'll leave it at that for the moment. And so I understand from a different perspective than some of the other guys here, the machination of that oil field cartel syndicate that has so much sway and influence over what happens in Alberta, and is in some machinations equally connected to some of these other things, and they kind of tend to operate within an entirely different ecosystem and environment, and the police become yes men to whatever the oil companies ultimately dictate, and there's somebody that puts them in their place according to what they want the outcome to be, and they will do whatever it takes with escalating levels of deterrence to get you removed from the industry, bankrupt you, take you away from your expertise and all of those things. So you're kind of at the crosshairs of a whole bunch of those things coming together, and it makes total sense to me, I'm afraid to say.
I wanted to just chime in quickly. Wayne, I think most of us would know, but Byron Christopher, he stood on stage last March in Edmonton with Wayne and Chris Sims and Kid Carson. He's lying in a hospital at the U of A in Edmonton right now. My wishes and prayers go out to him. But it's funny when you talk oil companies and you talk right around that time frame. The man who broke and helped break a story and then talked about it on here about Talisman Energy was Byron Christopher, and he had CSIS live next door to him. And so when you get talking oil and all the money and the power and the corruption and maybe some of the agencies doing some work on a journalist, and that would have been Byron Christopher back then. That's the thought that comes to mind. And a shout out to Byron wherever he's at. Hopefully he tunes in and feels better soon. But he is laying in a hospital, so my best wishes to him. But he's a guy who broke a lot of different stories the old school way, and that was right around that time as well. David, I'll bring you back into the center fold here. I just wanted to make sure. Sure.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say I have to jump out at 8, and this is probably a good spot to just call it a minute early and then let you guys continue with the rest of it. Thanks for having me. I think it's going to keep streaming on my Twitter. Hopefully it does. All the best, guys. Good luck with the rest of it.
Thanks for getting it out, man.
Now, David, we stopped you, and I don't know where you want to pick up. I wanted to get some feedback from the guys on the side, right? They've been sitting, and you got some really interesting show hosts and people who've been digging into a lot of different parts of our Canadian culture and the different systems that make it operate. And so feel free to continue on. I just want to make sure that we're letting them interact and have their thoughts with parts of your story and ask questions and try and dig out some gold, if you would, in the best possible sense.
Yeah, well, I'm loving it, and I really appreciate the format, and I really appreciate hearing from the guests, and maybe this is a good time to say that I don't know any of you, and so there's no we didn't set this up. This is just happening sort of au naturel, and we're just it's great. And plus, it gives me a bit of chance to think about what I want to talk about next. But it's really great to hear your guys' thoughts on this, because one of the things that they do in lawfare is they like to separate you from the herd. I had over, and Leighton will probably want to fall off his chair, but I've had over 20 lawyers on this case over the last 10 years. I actually had a lawyer hired for me by the RCMP in October 2020 to try and clean this up. He lasted 6 months before it got too hot for him, and we could talk about that later, but I just want to point that out, that I've paid for probably $750,000 worth of lawyer fees.
I'm sorry. I'm like, I wonder if we got a lawyer on. I'm like, I wonder what too hot to handle is these days.
Basic rule of thumb is never hire a lawyer who is recommended to you by the RCMP.
Yeah. Oh no! Actually, at this point, that's
a sad thing to admit.
I'm not laughing at you, David.
No, we're not laughing at you. We're laughing at the fact that if the RCMP goes, "Hey, maybe go over here," you should probably walk the other way.
Yeah, but I understand because David was trusting, and the police are part of this. They're part of it.
Yes.
But David was trusting in the police, and this is something that as Canadians, my generation certainly, we were taught to trust the police and to cooperate with them. And I honestly, I didn't realize the extent to which the police operate until I became a criminal defense lawyer. And then I saw a lot of things that really shocked me, that I didn't think happened. They certainly didn't happen on TV. But the reality is, and I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, because there are many, many RCMP members and other serving police officers who are good, honest, decent people who are in policing for the right reason. But that's not uniform. Pardon the pun. There are, and this politicization that I talked about in the judiciary and in the legal profession, it's also in policing. And if you want to see a great example of this recently, think of the protest on Highway 1.
Think of the protest here in Lloyd, Leighton. We had 30 cops show up from all over Canada. Like, it was strange. They had automatic weapons. Like it was right here in Lloyd. I don't have to go anywhere. I literally had to drive down the road. Yeah. Now I apologize. I'm going to bring it back to David. I love a good round table. If you follow me, you know that I love healthy banter. David, you got four guys who are ready, just chomping at the bit to hop in with you.
Yeah. I haven't even gotten to the good part yet, but I'm really enjoying this. Thanks so much, Leighton, for your wisdom on this, because you're seeing it from a higher level. I'm in it. I'm in the middle of it, and sometimes you can't see the forest of the trees. But
right.
But let me just say that, lawfare takes forms in many ways, and most people think that it's breaking the guy down to blow his finances, which I did do, which was part of it. 20 lawyers don't come cheap over 10-year period, and you're paying anything from $200 a lawyer for like a junior guy to over $600 for a senior guy, and I had lots of senior guys. And lots of law firms in Calgary and in BC, and some really good lawyers, really great lawyers. But the other way they do it, so I'm gonna talk to a few specifics in the court that are actual examples that happened to me, and you can decide for yourselves. I'm not going to say it's corruption. I'm just gonna lay out the facts as they happened in a couple of the instances, and you can chime in when you want. But the first one was when I first went to court in the oil and gas company matter, which was in November of 2015. So again, I finished working for the RCMP. The investigation at the Alberta Securities Commission is quashed, and now they are taking me to court in November 17th of 2015. That's the date. And They were forcing me into, without getting into the minutia and the details. I'm just gonna highlight the key parts, and Leighton, if you want to explain some of these things to the viewers so they understand them a little bit better than I can probably explain them, just please jump in. But I was being forced into what's called case management, and as I understood case management at that time, is you have the same judge. It puts some efficiencies into the court, so that you, every time you go to court, presumably you're going to go, this case was going to be a long case, and it was going to have lots of application for this and that and the other thing, and rather than going to a different judge every time you went to court and waiting in line and such to see your case, they were forcing me into case management. Now at that point in time, I was nervous. I believed I was being surveilled. The police, the RCMP were watching me. Whole other story, but you can quit the police, but the police don't quit you, as I understood, afterwards. And strange things were happening. I was having strange people show up into our lives, and there was some things that we were concerned about, and so I became paranoid in 2015, and when they were forcing me into case management, the only thing I could think of was they got the judge bot. Now you can appreciate, for a guy who thinks that police are good, now is paranoid about them, and who thinks the justice system works, those thoughts, you don't say them out loud. You're just thinking, okay, well, I think this, this can't be true. This can't be happening. So again, I'm not going to name names on this one, but I'm going to tell you that I got forced into case management, and which means you get to say the judge all the time. I'm not going to say the judge's name, and I'm not going to give you those details. You can read that in the court documents if you wish. There's a full transcript of what happened that day on November 17, 2015, but it would shock you. But I will say that what transpired was, I brought my concerns to the opposing lawyer that I thought that the judge was biased. I used the word biased. I didn't say corrupt. I didn't say, he was bought.
That is the correct word.
That is the correct word.
And actually, the test, the test for that is a reasonable apprehension of bias.
Exactly.
Which in common parlance is, it seems like that judge is against me.
Yes.
That's the impression, right?
Yes.
And there's a reasonableness to it, but it's more of a subjective reasonableness. It's not,
yes,
you can't, you can't prove, most of the time you can't prove bias. But there's an old adage that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done.
Yes.
And if you were getting the impression in the court process that justice was not seeming to be done, then something was dreadfully wrong, and you obviously sensed that.
Yep. I sensed it. I actually wasn't the one who brought it up to the court. In that first few moments, if you go through the transcripts, you'll see where the opposing lawyer said to the judge, Mr. Drover has some concerns that you're biased. And the judge looked right at me. He asked me who it was. I told him who it was, and this person was not even this person. I was actually working with the RCMP to investigate. And the reason why I quit with the RCMP is because the RCMP told me that they can no longer investigate these people because of this guy's links to Justin Trudeau. That's the exact words. And so
you're talking about the judge now?
Sorry. As I said, I quit working for the RCMP in February 2015 for my health, for the safety of my family. The reason why I quit was because I was told by the RCMP member who I was working for, that they could no longer pursue this investigation into this company because of this particular guy's links to Justin Trudeau. Those, again, exact words. I can't make it up. And why would I? It'd have to be insane. So again, now we're back to the judge. So the person I told the judge that I thought he had a bias with was this same person that the RCMP had told me that because this person and the links to Justin Trudeau, that they could no longer investigate. And so I just said the name, and he said, well, I know this person, but no, I don't have a conflict with this person. And I'm being careful. And he said some other things, that his wife also knew this person who worked at the University of Calgary. And he said something to the effect of, if you're okay with that, Mr. Drover, we'll continue. And I remember my response to the word. I said, you seem like an honorable man. I trust your decision on this matter, and let's keep going. Okay. Unfortunately, at that point, I had the pang in my stomach, and I pressed the matter, as you'll read in the transcripts, to the point where he almost said something nasty to me. I believe he said, stop interrupting, or something to that effect, which made me keep going. And I'd say we're now in the court 20 minutes. Again, this is case management. He's basically like seized this case. I've told him that I didn't consent to, that was the other thing, Leighton, I should have said, is that with case management, you have to have two parties consent to it. I've never consented. I was concerned. I may have said to the judge, look, I was concerned about this case management thing, and that, there was some bias here because of that. He said some things that made me think that, he's biased. And all I can tell you, it was like this is one of the many moments that I had like this for the past 10 years with judges, because I've been in front of lots. I've been in front of at least 6 judges. There's at least 4 or 5 other judges who know my case very well, both in BC and Alberta. So this is, there's so many judges that I've seen. I've got a PhD in the court system. I used to know the Alberta rules of courts and the BC rules of courts almost off by heart. But in any case, I'm 20 minutes in now. I'm now basically kind of like harassing and pissing him off. Unfortunately, this was done over the phone, so I couldn't see his face or what was happening. So I was just strictly going on his voice. And the moment was just like, again, like Tom Cruise, just like I was the Tom Cruise just hammering at him. And all of a sudden it was just like, again, I couldn't see what happened in the courtroom, but he must have it was like he snapped and said something like, I'm a jerk. Now this person that I said to him has no link to this case, except that my oil and gas company is in his office, and he's part of the they. So which they is holding my company hostage in that office, which is an Alberta owned bank. Again, I can't speak to the details, except that if anyone was to go and read this stuff, this transcript of November 17, 2015, it would be clear as a whistle what happened. And that judge had a moment of, I don't know, guilt, or like he felt like he needs to come clean, but it was like he hammered the hammer down and said, I don't have the conflict with this guy my wife does at the University of Calgary, who was this VP of business development at the time at the University of Calgary, who collects donations for the University of Calgary. And this guy was a significant donor to the University of Calgary. So and also this judge was a judge in residence the previous year at the law school at the University of Calgary. So I mean, at this point in time, I'm on the phone, I'm at home, and it was early in the morning, and I was actually in my pajamas. And I because I'm in BC, so it's an hour behind, but in any case, I've never actually heard of someone going to go into court with their pajamas on, but that was that day. And I remember that I almost jumped up and hit the ceiling. I could not believe that this judge had just admitted it, even though at the first few minutes he He explained himself, said there was no conflict and no conflict with his wife. And then, as I pressed him, boom, he's gone. Now, okay, so let's just say, let's leave it at that. I think I beat it to death. I think you get an appreciation for what happened. Now, for any of those who are watching and probably thinking, well, is there any recourse with a judge who you think may have been biased who pulled something like this? Well, there is, and it's called the Canadian Judicial Council.
Mhm.
And at the time, I wasn't really aware of this, but I did file a complaint against this judge a couple of years later. The executive director of the Canadian Judicial Council is a man named Norman Sabarin. I like to think that I had something to do with his disappearance from there. Again, I'm not going to get into that, except to say that I did file a complaint against a number of judges, actually, I was in front of. And that particular one was all of them were dismissed. So in my research and investigations of this thing, basically complaints against, well, first of all, no lawyers file complaints against judges. As you know, judges become lawyers, lawyers were judges.
Well, that's not exactly true. That's not exactly true. I'll give you a recent example that will illustrate this point and tell you the problem with the Judicial Council of Canada. So you might recall this, but in the aftermath of the Freedom Convoy, the Chief Judge of Canada, the Supreme Court, whose name is Wagner, he gave an interview in a French publication called Les Devoirs, in which he characterized the protest on Wellington Street, where Parliament and the Supreme Court are located, as, quote, the beginning of anarchy, where some people have decided to take other citizens hostage. And the article reported that Wagner declared that, quote, force blows against the state, justice, and democratic institutions like the one delivered by protesters should be denounced with force by all figures of power in this country. Well, a number of lawyers did make a complaint to the Judicial Council of Canada about that statement, but their complaint was summarily dismissed. Now, I don't know if this is the reason, but it just so happens that the head of the Judicial Council of Canada is none other than Chief Justice Wagner.
Well, if I could
is that one of those? Sorry, Leighton. Is that one of those we investigated ourselves and found out that we did nothing wrong?
That was a lawyer's version of a mic drop there. I didn't make that clear. But that's yeah.
It just seems to me, boys, like we're seeing this play out across multiple different organizations, professions, et cetera, et cetera. I honestly think of Chase Barber and MNP and the corruption going on there, where they said, apply for the grant, we're going to hand out the grant, and if you pay us $500,000, you'll get the grant, right? And he's like, right, what? And then and that scandal has picked up steam. It hasn't died off to where they're threatening to sue him and on and this just goes on and on and on. And I think we're all getting the same picture here when it comes to government and the way we look at it and start to look and see what's actually going on. Did I hear though, and forgive me, David, did you say that the RCMP officer told you, listen, we can't investigate these guys anymore because they're friends with Justin Trudeau? Did I not hear that?
Okay, so I don't know how to say that except I swear on the Bible, or I mean, and this is in court documents now as well. So
see, that's the point that makes me squirm. Yeah. That's the point that makes me squirm, and what your latest last section was on, because although I've been canceled and deplatformed and removed from the public space for any number of discussions that I've had, the one that has been the most permanent and everlasting and brutal and forceful has been the one where I recorded and published on Rumble the Twitter of the head of the Teamsters Union meeting with an emergency group of union members and telling them that, look, guys, we know that this is illegal, but the boss is Trudeau's buddy, so we're doing it anyway. And that got me removed. All evidence of that has been removed from this space. Those people that we helped get into that meeting of significance have all vanished. Imagine that from the public space, and their jobs. I have no way of reconnecting with any single member of them that was in that video. How funny is that? How these things with Trudeau's buddies just magically disappear. Sorry for being so far out in the left weeds on this, David, but
Mhm.
that's
I don't think you're out in the weeds, though. I think we're
Wow.
witnessing it happen real time over the course of his reign. And I would say it's starting to pick up steam with publications and different people starting to actually talk about it. And the people who talked about it a while back, they just didn't last very long. And now it just seems like it's kind of just like commonplace. If you're friends with the liberals, chances are you're going to get some sweetheart deals if you're in the right spots. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but that's the way my eyes and ears
Yeah.
see it.
Well, the other layer of that, Sean, is that it's pretty clear to me, and it should be clear to other people, I think, that Mr. Trudeau and his government are not the ones making decisions about our country. So that the people really running this country, at least as far as I can tell, is that Canada is becoming a Chinese client state. This is what's really going on in our country. So the protection of people who are connected to the Prime Minister is really protection of the conspiracy, which is that Canada is being run by the Chinese. And this runs all the way through SNC Lavalin and all of the other cover-ups, including the most recent, attempted investigation into Chinese election interference, in which, Mr. Trudeau actually, testified about that. And it runs all the way through things like Arrive scam. It runs through the Winnipeg lab with the Chinese. Yeah. So you really, there's this thread running all the way through this. Even the WEF and the WHO, and indeed the UN, in my opinion, are fronts for this attempt to have Chinese hegemony. They're attacking U.S. hegemony, and they pitch their flag in our country, and we're seeing the erosion of our institutions, our cherished institutions, so that they're hollowed out. They have the sort of the storefront of what they used to be. But when you look at universities, look at what's going on in the United States at Columbia University right now. That isn't a university anymore. They've kicked all the kids out. The rest of the year, they're going to have to take their classes online because Palestinian protesters who are being sponsored from people outside the country have taken over the place. So which is essentially an act of terrorism. Well, where are the police to suppress this? We all know what's going on, I think.
This is exactly why Trudeau runs around the country going directly to the municipalities that he wants to bribe and blackmail to, and circumvents the establishment, the elected officials of the provincial governments. These foreign created or manufactured policy ideas then become implemented at the municipal level through people like Trudeau, circumventing those that are duly elected. So they do this through the courts and the manipulation, controlling the controllers. The people that control the outcome are the ones that are most heavily leaned upon by those that are in the enforcement agency through the dollars and cents that they wield over the local influence that they have. So we have this total foreign ideology and bottom down implementation. So this is why they fear us and these conversations the most, is because we're recognizing and exposing the patterns across not just regions but industries. And that's why this, David, is so interesting to me, because you've got the nuts and bolts and receipts on a parallel industry exposing the same pattern of corruption, crime, and collusion, and it shines a light on the cracks in where the plants of the problem are.
Well, yeah, and Wayne, that's a great point. And in fact, you and I, when I was on your show, we talked about UNDRIP, which is another one of these. And then you see, I don't know if people watch the news today, but the United States, apparently President Biden is seriously considering declaring another state of emergency, which would operate much like COVID in relation to the sun monster. He's going to declare a climate emergency just in time for the November election. This worked very well for them in 2020. And I think if that happens, what you're going to see in Canada with the Liberals way down, sinking like a stone in the polls, that they will call an election during that emergency because, of course, they'll be able to control all the variables that they did in the 2021 election, which allowed them to win with Chinese interference. So again, all of these levers are being used, and it's in a situation where our country is not operating or looking much like it did about 5 or 10 years ago. And I think, Mr. Drover, coming back to your situation, just to add on to Wayne's point, your situation, unfortunately, I know I don't mean to talk about you in the abstract because it's the opposite. It's very concrete. And when people see this impacting one of us, you're one of us. You're a great Canadian success story. We should be holding you up as an example of what Canada can and should be. You worked hard, you built a successful company, you're supporting your family, you're supporting all kinds of other people, your extended family, you're creating jobs, you're creating wealth. But the opposite happens. Instead of holding you up as an example and rewarding you for your hard work, your company's
You're the target.
Set somebody. That's it. You paint a target on your back for being a success. And that happens in states like China. It's not supposed to happen here.
This is a huge point. David, you've now become the recognizable face and voice to the other side of the coin, to the story that I was talking about a few weeks ago, uncovering that Stéphane Chapeau is the head of his own private nonprofit, non-governmental organization that receives millions of dollars from the government to lobby in Europe against Alberta Energy and to provide companies over there with the methodologies to engage in lawfare of companies over here that will not comply. So you are the person that they're targeting through exactly those machinery of silencing and ending the energy industry in Alberta. And how dare you be a success in the face of their fascism?
Yeah, I've been made to feel bad for my degrees, for what I did for a living. And so to your point, perhaps I pose a threat because there's no one that knows best about climate change, or certainly knows a lot about climate change, that the climate has always changed for many billions of years, is a geologist who studies the rock record and ice cores. Rock record gives you back hundreds of millions of years of what the pressure and temperatures were, and the CO2 content, and the ice cores give you, I think they're getting up to 1 million years, but at least a couple 100,000. As you know, here in Canada, 12,000 years ago, we were covered over by an ice sheet from coast to coast to coast. So we're at the end of that. As when you see the glaciers in the mountains now, that's the termination phase of the glaciers that existed covering the entire Canadian continent. So there's a lot of mis and disinformation, which are words that I never heard of before, especially the disinformation part, until they rolled out the agendas. And so remember I was telling you about I was in court in November 2015. That the world changed. I know from my experience, and I would say September 2015 the world changed, if I was to put a date on it. And I think there was things, if you go back into the time machine on your Google browser, you'll find out that there was things happening worldwide. So let me come back to this investigation. So what I didn't say, and what I probably should say now, is that the investigation I worked on, which I said was $100 million fraud, it was international. It had international shareholders, very wealthy shareholders, very high profile people in the US, Canada, and other countries. Let me just say that. I was like, I was just that guy who had an inside that not many people get. And I wasn't that guy. And I there was, you know, at the end of all this, I could say that I have my integrity. What did that cost me? Well, it cost me everything except my family. Somehow my family managed to stay with me despite some allegations that I will, you know, there was an allegation with the BC Child and Family Services that was anonymous, of course, that said that my wife and my children, you know, were threatened by me. But just as an example, maybe I'll come back to that. But where I wanted to go was, again, this is not your cookie cutter fraud that's just like a bunch of guys got together and decided this is an international.
Yes.
This has implications on world governments, and I
Uh,
had a window on it. And I mean, I can't say what the investigation was about, but you can use your imagination. Okay, just think up the worst case scenario, and you'd probably be pretty damn close.
at
And
another time, David, I'd like to pick your brains on this a little bit more, but before it gets too far away from it, I'd like to reinforce one of the points that Leighton made about Biden wanting to declare an emergency on climate. This is something that our Canadian government has spent millions of your tax dollars on lobbying the WHO to include climate change as a method and a reason and a justification for another international lockdown. And so this is one of the things that they're trying to, and again, gain power over us through climate scam as a justification for another series of lockdown measures, and that they're voting on this coming month in a couple of weeks. And this kind of discussion has so much bearing on that because this is the conversation. They don't want us focusing on the climate. They don't want us focusing on energy, the corruption, those kinds of things, David. But and that's why they want us. That's one of the ways that they want to use to silence us, not just to go into jail for promoting oil and gas, but it's literally, how dare you talk about energy in a climate crisis and an emergency lockdown.
You know, I gotta laugh at that, you know, because I mean, literally, you know, if you're sitting and you're listening to this conversation, you're going, this is something, you know, and then you had the NDP put a bill forward, try to get it. So if you promoted oil and gas, get in jail. Hey, none of that. And I'm like, you know, as crazy as this conversation is, the world just keeps feeding us it, doesn't it, fellas? You know, I'm keeping track of time here. I know from these that we can go for a very long time, and I'm not shutting it down right now. But what I would like to do is I would like to direct. You know, we probably got 28 minutes. Like, you know, in my mind, I was the 7 to 9, a 2-hour time frame for you, David, for everyone else sitting on this. And I just want to really narrow in on the last 28, 25 minutes, whatever we got. You know, David, if there's something you haven't talked about that you think people should hear, or the group of guys sitting here, please let's go there for the last 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll slowly wrap this up. And by all means, we'll stick on as long as we need to. But at the same time, you know, we're closing in on the 2-hour mark.
well, I was just actually getting started. I haven't told you anything yet. So let me go right to it. So remember I said that I had that phone call with that RCMP officer who convinced me to help them out. That RCMP, so there's confidentiality goes both ways with those guys. I wasn't the one who breached that I worked for the RCMP. The RCMP, or the Cullen Commission, was Justice Cullen. On that, again, there's so much story and so many directions I can go here. But what I want to say is that RCMP who had that phone call with me, who convinced me to work for the RCMP, he's now a deputy commissioner of the RCMP. So there's 30,000 members roughly. 6 or 7 or 8 of them are deputy commissioners. He's one of them. And so when they quashed the again, I can only assume that they quashed the RCMP investigation. I wasn't part of the RCMP investigation at that time, but I'm only assuming that sometime around August or September of 2015, they quashed the investigation, likely because of the reasons that it was investigating high profile people, and it would have an impact on Justin Trudeau getting elected in the following months in October 19th of 2015. Again, I'm just, how could a guy who, you know, be making this shit up if he's calling out dates of the election in 2015? And I know that because I sent Justin Trudeau an email on October the 16th, 2015, to tell him just that. I said, look, you're going in this election. I just want to warn you that you have someone close to you who was on an advisory council that I had to be very careful, because I didn't say that I worked for the RCMP to investigate, but put it this way, if any reasonable person had opened up that email and read it, they would have went, uh-oh, there's problems. And, you know, dare I say this bold statement, and I don't care who comes at me because I can prove it. But what I knew about the investigation with the RCMP, what I knew about the investigation at the Alberta Securities Commission, what I know 20 or 30 people, I knew 5 or 6 RCMP that I had lots of communications with, multiple phones, secure emails, which I've kept all that. There's a lot of people that know at the Alberta Securities Commission. There's a lot of people that know at the RCMP, just alone. There's a lot more other people that have known since, because I've told them. But the bold statement is that if these people, the RCMP and Alberta Securities Commission, had made known what was happening in this, and their investigations that they did in parallel, without the ASC even knowing that the RCMP was investigating, I guarantee you, I believe strongly that Justin Trudeau would never have been elected in October 2015. Now, why would I say something like that if I didn't know something that would make me say that? And if these police officers, RCMP and the Alberta Securities Commission, who there's people still around, the person that at the Alberta Securities Commission, Cynthia Campbell, if some reporter just asked her a question to say what was being investigated prior to the October 2015 election that had some links to Justin Trudeau, this could all be blown out of the water. If one person spoke besides me, and, you know, my life's been at risk for 10 years. I'm finally talking about it for reasons that if I was to go into, you just simply wouldn't believe that either. But it's like, why? I don't know how after almost 10 years this hasn't come out. And it's clear to me that it's corruption at the highest levels, and it's a global thing. There's international. This is things that takes down, you know, things that take down governments in the world. Like, there's dead people associated with this. Like, you know, like, this is serious business. And you know, the worst thing about at least with the RCMP, they didn't threaten me. Well, I'll get to that, where they did threaten to arrest me, which I think I should go to next. But with the Alberta Securities Commission, I got so many emails from Paul Kavanagh, the lead investigator, who was the one who subpoenaed me, plus Cynthia Campbell, plus David Linder, saying, hey, if you talk about this, you're going to get jail time and a fine. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I've applied to get my transcripts. Now get this, I applied to get my transcripts at the Alberta Securities Commission, which I provided sworn testimony to give it to the RCMP. And Cynthia Campbell, the director of enforcement at the ASC, told me I couldn't give it to the RCMP. Now, at the time, I wasn't working with them, but I still, you know, had them on speed dial. So it would have been nothing to give it to them. But I mean, how does that, like, does that make any sense to anybody on the call? Like, if that isn't the most, you know, craziest thing I've said all night, which, like, again, I'm like, why would I make that up? And again, I could name the RCMP, but I'm not going to. I'm hoping that maybe they might come out and say, hey, you know, this guy is telling the truth. And Justin Trudeau would not have been elected. I strongly believe that. And what happened? And I only point to the global agenda that I believe, you know, started in around September 2015. And here we see it. Like, you know, when I was talking with you guys before, I said I was like patient zero for because what happened to me with my professional association with the RCMP and in the courts, the lawfare part of it, the corruption that I was seeing all around me, it was like, again, I was like an illegally targeted political prisoner in my own country. You know, I mean, I don't, how can you have 10 judges my case has passed through 10 judges, federal court judges, and someone not go, I wonder if he's telling the truth. They actually filed lawsuits against me, not only for for defrauding my own oil and gas company, but for defrauding the company I work with the RCMP to take down. So, anyways, let's continue with. So,
if you don't, I'm,
Sir.
once again, you just said something that really, you probably can't say it, but I want to make sure my ears heard correctly. You're saying that you have things that could have stopped Justin Trudeau from being prime minister. Did I hear that correctly? Like, I'm not going.
I would say I sent him a note, first of all. I sent him an email. He can go check his emails if he wants to.
You emailed Justin Trudeau.
I emailed Justin Trudeau. I emailed lots of
I've emailed him too.
Christy Freeland. So all this is on record. It's not even something I can make up. And I've got the receipts because they're in my outbox.
I think the point that I'm taking here is that an investigation into Trudeau's involvement in $100 million mineral cover-up that allowed him to become prime minister might have changed the fact as to whether he became prime minister or not.
Let me be very clear on that. I'm not suggesting that Justin was part of that.
No,
there was a link to him. One of the persons was his close advisor, who was.
Trudeau loves his shady advisors.
Well, and at this point, I'm like, maybe I'm wrong on this. I'd be curious everybody else's thoughts on this call. I'm like, at this point, I feel like 100 million is like Trump change to Trudeau. I feel like he just finds his way into all these quagmires that should take down any acting prime minister, and he just like scoots on through it at this point.
So I want to be clear again. Okay, it's one of those things. It's if you're going to go into an election and you don't have your house cleaned up, let's just say you got a couple of bad actors that are advising you, you could potentially lose based on some news that came out that they were involved in some, let's say criminality. Sure. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I would never implicate the Prime Minister of Canada in perpetrating the crimes. That's not what happened to my understanding. But there was people around him who the RCMP and the Alberta Securities Commission and many, many others, I know because I've talked to them and told them that there's no doubt that this person was. I'm basically, I had to be cleaned up. There was no doubt. And again, I use the analogy, like if you rub up against someone in the clothing aisle in Walmart, and over the next 10 years they nuke your family, there's something that you knew during a RCMP investigation and Alberta Securities Commission investigation that you clearly knew that people don't want you to talk about. It's just it's just math. Like it's and I always knew that, and that I always knew I couldn't talk about it. It was my wife actually who's told me. She said, probably 2015, which I was like not ready for. She said, "I think you're in the middle of something global," and I was like, and the saying where you're like, "Well, it's not about me," or someone says, "You look, get over yourself. It's not about you." Well, actually, I think it was a lot to do with me actually, and what I knew. And so I didn't do anything criminal. I actually haven't done anything wrong in my life. Actually, I think, like I said on the last podcast, my parents would say I was the best, goodest child ever. It was, I just didn't do a bad thing. In fact, like I said, my yearbook probably said least likely to go to jail. And yet I went to jail. So, and I have a jail sentence hanging over my head if I say the wrong thing. I mean, that to people alone should go, huh? And it's my professional association that has the jail sentence over my head. So this is not rocket science to figure out that someone needs to keep me quiet.
Once again, David, I sit here. I was telling you before we started, got to talk to Tony Olenek today. Obviously, I think all of us know who Tamara Leach is, or Chris Barber, or the list goes on. There's a lot of peaceful people who went against the machine and ended up behind bars and for a long period of time. Heck, the Tony and Chris are 800 days as of today. I believe it's 800 today, boys. So like when you step into these quagmires or you come in the crosshairs, I think all of us can understand how quickly this can escalate. It's just some of the things that you're talking about. I'm like, holy man, like this isn't, I don't know, some local little issue. This is the deeper you go, the larger this becomes, the more characters you're pulling into $100 million deal in a Alberta company, right? I think am I tying this all, like every time you go a little further, I'm like, and this all comes back down to a guy in Alberta.
Well, I spent 10 years on this, and we could go a whole different tangent on. My specialty was investigating mining frauds and oil and gas frauds. I became a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which ended up banning me as well. So these frauds are very, very complicated. And I was only able to start to investigate because I was a shareholder of it. So I received the shareholder reports that I was able to put the pieces together. The RCMP had no clue. They had no clue. They had zero. That's why they came to me. They were like, well, he's a shareholder of this thing. He must know, and he's geological, so maybe he could help. And, what I put together was these companies are ran offshore. So again, I could go down another rabbit hole. I don't want to, but they're generally, let me just summarize. People need to go back to the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers. I was on that with the RCMP years prior. So I'll leave it at that. So these are offshore companies, very, very wealthy people put their money offshore to evade taxes and do certain other things. So these things are, even though it was sort of based out of Calgary, it wasn't a Calgary company. It was and the shareholders are hidden. I was one of the shareholders. You can't get a shareholder list from these companies, and they're hidden under layers and layers of companies. I talked to a guy in the BVI. He was a Scotland Yard, ex Scotland Yard, and he was investigating companies in the BVI. And this goes back to, I don't know, 2015, 2016. And he told me to get one name off the shareholder list of this particular company would cost me $80,000 US. And he said, it's not even guaranteed I could get you the name. Now, I know there was 100 shareholders plus, or, there was tens of shareholders in this company, again, all over the world. So this is not rocket science. So anyways, let me continue to January 2016, because that's one of my problems that we're kind of getting the guts of it now. So that's my problem started. And like I said in the podcast with Sheldon and Drew was that I just had a pang in my stomach. I was again, nobody knew that I worked for the RCMP. It's been now, a year or so since I quit. And I felt something was going wrong. I was doing my own investigations at the time, sort of 24/7. So I hadn't stopped, and I was getting things like messages saying, "You're a rat." And I'm like, what? And another one was, don't mind Drover, he's a diagnosed sociopath on medication. And you should see the next judge that this guy is going to get in the Alberta courts. As if to say, we've set this guy up with another judge, which they did do, and which ended badly for me. So at that time, I was finding out some other things, some international things. So again, I can't make this up, some international things happened, and it panicked me. I thought for sure my life was in danger. And I had asked the police when I finished working with them back in February 2015, if they could provide me 24/7 protection. So is that not resonating with you guys? Like, right? Like, if you're asking for 24/7 protection out the front of your door and you're concerned by a drive-by shooting or something, that might tell you something, all right, about what I was learning. But by the time January 2016 came, I was like, holy shit. The Alberta Securities Commission, Cynthia Campbell, she writes me a letter, bans me from sending emails to the Alberta Securities Commission. It's like, stop, you're harassing us, basically. And I'm like, no, you need to know this information. Like, you need to restart the investigation. What's going on? So I look, this is on record. I have a copy of it. I got it through FOIP. I called the Premier's office, Notley at the time. I spoke to, it's called a telephone action request. If you want to FOIP it, go FOIP it. And I consent you to use my name to FOIP it. And it was a telephone conversation that I had with a woman in the Premier Notley's office, that her name was Sorcha Thomas. And I'm telling her that I'm concerned about that, the fact that the Alberta Securities Commission, Joe Ceci was the minister responsible at the time, and they were also linked into this. I think it was the Alberta TNB, right? Whatever TNB stands for, and Ministry of TNB, and this was information was also going to his office as well as the Premier's office. I was saying, listen, I think the ASC has quashed this investigation into a high-profile person, and you need to reopen it, and hence the telephone action request. And that's when my life really turned around. They obviously didn't do anything. I think that, well, the date of that telephone action request, I know it's January the 7th, 2016. And the next thing that happened was, out of the blue, I get an email. It sort of wasn't out of the blue, but it was sort of related to this January 7th telephone access request, where I had made a request. I can't get into the details. All I will tell you is that Andrew Tarver, the chief of staff of Minister Gainley, who was Kathleen Gainley, who was the justice minister at the time, sent me an email. And it said a certain couple of sentences, which I can't speak about. And I was like, ooh, that's weird. That makes no sense. And I just left it. It turns out that in the years to come, I had done a FOIP on Kathleen Gainley's email, which is where I received the telephone action request, actually. So she had a copy of it, obviously, because I got a copy of it myself through her FOIP. But what I also got is they, plus their lawyer, had communications with her in an email of which she responded to, of which they're telling her what to respond to me in that email that I talked to you about, that I got from Kathleen Gainley, Andrew Tarver, chief of staff. Do you see what I'm saying? And not only that, we were in court within days of that communication. And again, so I, and this is the one where it speaks to, oh, you can't, look, you should see who the judge, Mr. Drover, has for, I think we went to court in March of 2016. And again, I can't make it up. It's what I have in FOIP there. I've filed all these with the courts. So it's not even something that someone couldn't follow a turkey trail and figure it all out. So everybody was in the know. Everybody was in the know because I told them. And
David,
Justin Trudeau was in the know. Yeah.
I'm just curious. What is the current status? Today, April 24th, April 23rd, sorry, 2024. What's the current status of your case?
It is the one case. The oil and gas company case is just in the courts, is just sitting there hanging out, and I don't even know.
Unresolved. Okay.
The lawyer of that case, who contacted Kathleen Gainley at that time, he has since become a Crown prosecutor. I know him in a different capacity.
Okay.
And that he was a Crown prosecutor in, of all places, the Lethbridge courts.
Okay.
I'm not going there. That's I'm not going there, but I just want to point that out. I know effectively I'm working with the police in this investigation against they, of which he is a they. And again, in the years to follow, I found out that this particular lawyer, at the time of the investigation at the ASC, worked as an investigator at the Alberta Securities Commission. So really take that in what I'm saying. And that judge that they said who was going to be this, wait till you get to see this judge that Drover's, going to see in March. Well, that judge, yeah. So he worked at the Alberta Securities Commission, that judge before becoming a judge in 2014 or so, worked at the Alberta Securities Commission with this lawyer that I'm in front of in March of 2016, who ruled against me and didn't disclose that they're buddies. They worked together at the Alberta Securities Commission because this lawyer worked as an investigator at the Alberta Securities Commission, likely at the same time, or there was overlap between these two guys. So I'm sitting there trying to argue my case as a self-represented litigant because this lawyer had allegedly threatened my lawyer off the case. And I'm none the wiser that these two are buddies. They work together. They probably drink from the same water cooler. So, again, I'm not saying names. I'm just, it's happened. You can go look at the court record. You could go look at these lawyers and judges and find out, what they did in their past. I mean, this is all on record. It's all filed in the courts now. So,
gentlemen,
yep.
As we get close to the 2-hour mark,
Yes.
the thing that comes to mind, I go like, at some point we have to we have to cut it off. And I know I've been following the comments and I find it funny. We're ready to roll. Keep going. But you go, well, you just do a part 2, or you find a way to unveil more of the story. There's ways to do this, but I guess from where I sit, I'm curious of the group here. Is there any final thoughts as we close in on the 2-hour mark? I had 2 hours in my brain. I don't want to, I know I'm looking around the room, virtual room, and I know there's things that all these fine gentlemen, including yourself, David, probably have on the go. And I go, is there any final comments here before we let everybody go for this night? And if there's appetite to hear more of the story, to have a part 2, to do another community hall, there's always the ability to do that. That's relatively easy. Is there any thoughts? Sheldon, you're the guy who helped spur this on. Any thoughts from your brain before we let everybody go?
Well, one of the things I was going to ask David is, you seem to have a lot of documentation and stuff, and I can appreciate, you're not allowed to share certain portions of it, but is there any way that you would be able to pass that along to everybody that's in the room? I'm sure that, given a little bit of time, we could drill into this a little bit more, publish a little bit more information on it. And then, just as what Sean said, have a round 2 of this. And we can kind of go through exactly, some of this, what this information looks like.
Yeah, I probably can't talk to the documents. Can I share them? Probably, but in the BC cases, these are easily accessed through court services online, and anyone can do it. It's I obviously have all this filed myself, but in PDFs and files, and it's backed up on third-party computer. I mean, I at one time I was facing some court dates, and a week before I had all my computers erased, and so they had that ability as well. So appreciate that all my files are meticulous. They're stored on clouds
essentially offline, though. If Sheldon were to reach out, there'd be a way to point him in the right direction, let's just say, in finding some of this.
Well, and some of it, what I was looking for was the FOIP documents too, because that's not something that I'm most likely going to find in the court documents, is it?
Well, I filed them. So first of all, this again, I'm sorry, but this one's got to be said. So I filed a complaint with the Law Society of Alberta. I'm very familiar with the Law Societies of Alberta and BC, and I might pull out the corrupt word a couple of times, but I filed lots of complaints against lawyers, all of them dismissed, maybe except for 2. one of them was a complaint that I filed with respect to what I just said about those communications, because obviously there's interference going on. If you have a lawyer and the plaintiff in a lawsuit contacting the Minister of Justice, giving the wording to put in an email to send to me, and calling me like some kind of tin hat lunatic fringe or something, don't mind that guy, he's just crazy. And finding that in a FOIP years after the case went to court and you lost, it was a security for cost application. And I filed a complaint against the Justice Minister of Alberta, Kathleen Gainley. I can't remember the year, but she was the Justice Minister at the time, and it was they outsourced it, and they outsourced it to a lawyer out of Winnipeg named Alan Feinblit. The lawyer for Kathleen Gainley his name was something Renouf of Renouf Law.
Simon Renouf.
Yeah, Simon. Yeah. And I mean, I have hundreds of, I have lots of communications between Simon and Alan Feinblit, who was investigating the Law Society. So he did investigate, and of course the findings were nothing. But let's just say I made shit up and there was nothing to it. I know there was something to it because I saw the communications, and it was definitely 100% interference. So nobody can tell me different, that it was interfered with. But you all remember when Tyler Shandro had the complaint filed against him when he was the Justice Minister. The NDP, unbelievably, and it probably was Ganley, they just tore him to pieces over this thing, and it eventually was dismissed. Mine was actually investigated. So, and I had emails with Kathleen Gainley about this. So this wasn't even, how does that not become public in nature? I don't get it.
Well, because I mean, at the end of the day, David, look at the world we're living in, right?
Yeah.
You ask questions like that, and you go, how hasn't some of this come public? I mean, we're walking.
See it.
We're walking through. Yeah.
Wayne,
if
there's nothing to see. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Wayne, any final thoughts?
Yeah, sorry about your luck, David. You don't get to be on a panel like this without having put up an immense amount of sacrifice and taking a lot of risk. And having a discussion like this is going to probably expound on all of that for you. And I'm sorry about your luck with that. Nobody wants to be here. I'm pretty sure you ask any of the other people here a few years ago, they would have never wanted to be or considered being in this position right here, right now. That being said, your story here is exponentially more interesting to me now than before we got here tonight. So if you'll consider a round two, I think there's obviously the number of people watching this everywhere is pretty much evidence that there's an appetite for more of this. So we'll leave that up to Sean and Sheldon to badger you for and arrange that. But I've got a lot more questions. I think some of what you're talking about happens to coincide an investigation of mine that I kind of had buried for a little while that had to do with some similar problems out of Calgary and international crime syndicates and oil companies like Burisma Holdings and people in certain parties involved in political issues involved with said crimes. So you've given me something to do over the next little while. So I hope we get a chance to carry on this conversation.
And finally, thanks, Wayne. And finally, Leighton, any final thoughts before we sign off for the night?
Yeah, well, one of the three temptations that is faced by Jesus Christ when he meets Satan after 40 days in the desert is the temptation of absolute power. Now, because Jesus was a God-man, he was able to resist. Unfortunately, human beings are much more frail. Lord Acton probably put it best when he said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what we are seeing is the outgrowth. Jesus also said, we'll know the tree by its fruits. And what the fruits are right now is an outgrowth, an explosion of administrative power. And all the people who are involved in the administrative state, from the police to the lawyers to investigators, and sadly even to the judiciary, and people who are performing quasi-judicial roles, people like labor arbitrators and human rights arbitrators. They're all unfortunately facing this same temptation. And it's a very difficult one to resist. And unfortunately, sadly, but actually, I think in a way that's a revelation. Your story is one that actually depicts what happens when absolute power corrupts absolutely. So thank you for sharing your story here tonight. I was very pleased to be involved in this, and I wish you all the best in fighting this tyranny, because it must be just awful to be where you are. And my prayers will be with you, sir.
Sean, can I say one thing before we let out here?
Sure.
I just wanted to thank everybody that showed up for the last couple of hours, and with the comments, and thanks for giving us some of your time just kind of listening on David's story. I want to thank you for hosting this, Sean. I want to thank Leighton and Wayne for coming out. We threw this together, like I said, really short notice. Fantastic that you guys could make it here, and of course, a big thanks again to you, David, for taking the time and having the being brave enough to share what you went through in whatever level you can.
Yeah, I heartfelt thank you for listening. The problem I had was a credibility issue over the last 10 years, and no one believed me, and so I just really appreciate the fact that you guys believe me. So just to listen to me and hear your guys' comments and be supportive is huge. It means everything to me right now. And again, I'm going to start with what I started with in the beginning. I don't want to be here. I didn't want to be on this show, but I don't have a choice. It's time now that this comes out, and I'm more than pleased to have a part two. This part one, I don't know, probably like 10% of my story. The jail part is I mean, it's just shocking. And I think it deserves a part two to just, because it's just unbelievable what they can do to a person like me. And like I said in my podcast, I'm the cautionary tale, the patient zero, whatever, that what's happened to everybody during a lot of Canadians during COVID happened to me before COVID. And the RCMP are involved, the Alberta Security Commission is involved, my professional associations were involved, and everyone, like I said in my podcast, it was like a game of football, and I was the guy holding the ball, and they just piled on. And for that, my family paid the price. So for my decisions to work with the RCMP, basically it had led to our lives being destroyed, and within a few years, all of our money gone and left homeless. So hopefully this is encouraging for some people to speak out, but people hearing this story, if this is what happens to someone who speaks out, who's going to speak out? Like, it's just it doesn't make sense to put your family in the same jeopardy. But it's time. I just knew it was time for me. It was when Sheldon and I had the conversation for 3 hours. I knew it was time, and so I'm that man in the arena now, and I've opened up Sheldon caused it. I've opened up Pandora's box, and here we are. So again, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening, not judging, and
well, one of the lovely things, and I want to thank all you guys for jumping on, for David for coming on. You mentioned it partway through. You don't know any of us from a hole in the ground, and one of the things that I have always appreciated about my audience, I'm assuming I can speak for the rest of the guys on the call, is they're smarter than me, right? Like they're literally smarter than me. They tune into this, they listen to this. I don't force feed them anything. They're gonna listen to your story. They're gonna make up their own mind. You're already seeing comments coming in. Everybody wants a part two. They want to know more. You've just teased them on jail, so they're like, well, what is it? And that's the way we end this, is by wanting them to have more, even though we know it's probably going to go down a darker rabbit hole. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank everybody who showed up for 2 hours in the middle of NHL playoffs to hear something a little bit different. And to Wayne specifically, I think it's an idea like this. Actually, yeah, honestly, Sheldon, maybe I'm the one late to the game here. Leighton's been doing spaces and everything. To have you guys on and hear one person's story and have a group of us kind of interact. Maybe we should be making this more of an occurrence as we go along, because there's a lot going on in Canada and abroad. And we're all trying to keep pace with it, and are all doing our very utmost to do that. And there's just no way one of us can capture it all. So having multiple people on tonight, and yourself, David, to tell your story, I think is a special thing that we can probably do more often if people are so inclined. Either way, thank you for all showing up tonight. That is the audience. That is the other hosts. And, of course, David. Folks, we will see you hopefully in the near future. Thanks, guys.
Sounds great.
Thanks again, guys. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Good night.